welcome again. We finished last time with one or two questions, one of which was, who is more worthy of our trust? Our neighbours with whom we share our daily concerns, or those prancing popinjays who view us as chattels to be used however they feel disposed? This question needs deeper inspection, because the answer to it has the capacity to exert a most extreme range of outcomes, both in our personal and communal lives. In Australia, we often hear talk of the pub test. This refers to responses to statements issued by a politician or public servant concerning proposed policies, or responses to questions about their recent activities. These frequently occasion controversy or ridicule. That BS doesn't pass the pub test means that the official narrative is not accepted by the common people, who are perfectly happy to refer to their obvious use of common sense as justification for their incredulity or derision. We see from this and many other situations that what we might term the average person favourably regards themselves as behaving in most circumstances in a law-abiding or proper manner, and is reasonably comfortable with classifying themselves as possessing normal cognitive functions, which places them squarely in the mix of the general population. There are numerous questions which, if posed to a large sample population, would elicit very commonplace answers, such things as, should people deal honestly with each other? Or should those behaving in a criminal manner be apprehended and brought to account? Would find almost universal agreement in the positive. So why is it that when we talk about jury service, especially in a trial by jury setting, that people are not willing to trust either themselves or many of their neighbours with such responsibility? Some of the reticence is no doubt due to the conditioning we've all received, which teaches us that law is a very complicated subject and the average person is not equipped to deal with the details, subtleties and intricacies of it. It's best left to the experts or those trained in its rituals and pitfalls, etc. Why this should be the general attitude is not entirely clear. Everyone has seen countless courtroom dramas on TV or in movies. And although these are travesties of the real trial by jury system, it's clear that in almost all the cases, the jurors are assisted by expert testimony when the cases involve situations with which most people would be unfamiliar, plus the inputs by the judges, who, although behaving unlawfully, to a large extent fulfill the role that should be undertaken by the court convener. It's not as though jurors are being asked to participate in some arcane or esoteric ritual, such as they might expect to encounter if expected to participate meaningfully in the hidden religious ceremonies of a hitherto unknown Amazonian tribe, is it? It's more likely that this reluctance to embrace the trial by jury concept and become involved in campaigning for its restoration is due simply to intellectual and spiritual laziness, lack of understanding of the basics, and fear of actually taking responsibility for the correct administration of justice and natural law. I'm putting forward the argument that these factors are the result of almost everyone refusing to confront truths about us that, when uncovered, leave honest people feeling very uncomfortable about their current sense of self-satisfaction concerning their law-abiding natures and their smugness about their normality as human beings. The argument has long raged among philosophers about whether people are basically good and caring and willing to cooperate harmoniously to bring about general good in the community, or whether we are basically egotistical and competitive and willing to engage in contests for the available resources, needing to be restrained at every turn lest we run amok in our individual quest for the satisfaction of our desires. There is evidence on both sides. Ultimately, as we're all individuals, it may be that each one can only be classified by their behaviour and its results, no matter what beautiful speeches they may utter. Let's look at some examples and see if we can unravel some of these complexities. Many of us would have been in the supermarket with few items in hand, and someone just ahead of us with a trolley load turns and says, "You only have a couple of items, would you like to go ahead of me?" We may have done the same thing in reverse, when we stood aside to let another through. Or what about the times when the traffic lights malfunction and instead of red and green, there is only the flashing of all the amber lights? Do people all rush up to the lights at speed, thinking, "Here's my chance to barge through without waiting, I always get the red at this intersection"? Or do they approach with caution, understanding that everyone else approaching has technically an equal right of way, and wanting to avoid senseless damage or injury from recklessness? If people see an accident or discover an infant in danger with the parents nowhere around, or the proverbial old lady waiting to cross the road, do they not almost invariably step in to help, or perform a rescue, often at serious danger to themselves? We see such examples and numerous others constantly throughout our lives. These speak of the inherent caring nature of human beings, which no doubt is conditioned into almost everyone by the unstinting devotion and care of family and friends while we're still young and helpless. There really is no other practical way for humans to come into a meaningful existence than via the family unit. Of course, there are exceptions caused by disasters, both natural and man-made, where youngsters are denied such benefits, but an upbringing in a family is the basic norm. It is also true that there are people and forces at work in the world who openly profess that it is their goal to dismantle this traditional means of composing human societies and replace it with a scenario where the state assumes the role of both parent and teacher, eliminating the close ties of cooperative behaviour and replacing it with an impersonal, overbearing and intrusive mechanism of bureaucracy and policing. To achieve this, it is first necessary to reduce people to a condition where they are dependent on the state for every important need, which also means, of course, that the people must be deprived of any means of resisting such schemes should they refuse to cooperate and need to be coerced by violence if necessary. Since the numbers involved in these schemes are very small in comparison with the bulk of the population and would be overwhelmed if the larger group rose up against them, it is sensible policy for this group of aspiring rulers to divide the larger group into many smaller groups and set them to competing with each other. Even better would be if those competing groups were contesting about matters of trivial importance and were thus blinded to the real threats to their security and harmony. The aspiring rulers have worked hard at this for hundreds of years. So today we see societies everywhere where people argue about who is the better sportsperson or entertainer, what shape of planet we inhabit, the definitions of words, with some of them not allowed to be spoken, and above all, which group of rulers ought to be wielding the whip over the people for the next few years, with the question of whether there ought to be any such group at all completely removed from the equation. Once, hundreds of years before even Magna Carta 1215, the people controlled the law through the trial by jury system. Magna Carta merely set this principle in document form, but in terms of natural law, even that wasn't necessary if individuals knew the law and were prepared to stand for it. Under trial by jury, the monarch and the administrators and even the parliamentarians are merely equals with the people if the people know their rights and will stand to defend them. So here are some questions for those who are thinking that they are law-abiding, decent types, not at all like those horrible criminals from whom we all need to be protected by wiser folk with their dedication to compiling ever more rules for us all to cower before. We're agreed, are we not, that to arbitrarily initiate coercion or force against a neighbour who had not harmed us would be a crime. Would such actions cease to be a crime if we could amass a large enough gang of Confederates to assist us? Or would that not place us in the category of criminal gangs, many of which we know exist already? What if one such gang could assume control of the legislature, which produces our statutes and acts? Would their actions cease to be criminal because this gang convinced everyone that someone has to be in charge, and these rules are for everyone's benefit, even though that were clearly not so? The argument would be, this is all legal, so there's nothing wrong, even though these rules clearly violate individuals' inalienable rights. Let's point out a couple of home truths here. As individuals, none of us has the right to initiate force or fraud against anyone else. If no one has that right, it is an undeniable truth that no one can bestow that right upon anyone else, be they an elected official or not, and petition those individuals to arbitrarily enforce their will upon anyone else by proxy. The nature of an act remains the same, no matter by how many it is perpetrated. A right act remains a right act, and a crime remains a crime. If any of the viewers or listeners are voting, or have voted in an election, for any candidate who is averring that they will enact any legislation which deprives anyone of an individual right or trespasses against them in any way, then that individual is guilty of aiding and abetting criminal activity. The state employs armed police to enforce these criminal statutes, and each person who participates in any way, whether by enacting, enforcing, or simply giving their imprimatur of support, their vote, is equally guilty. I know many will howl in outrage or squeal in denial that this is not so. But natural law is what it is. If people think that because everyone is doing it, that natural law will somehow go along with the crowd and stay its hand, that will be a cataclysmic mistake. The consequences of breaking natural law will simply fall on many more than they would otherwise have done. Many will say that everyone is doing it, so what's wrong with it? And that is exactly what those seeking our enslavement want people to think. They want everyone to share their guilt and thus ameliorate the karmic debt they are piling up. Ever heard of the saying, misery loves company? Those seeking to establish an enduring slavery over everyone are miserable people. They must be, mustn't they? That they cannot be satisfied with the normal joyful pleasures of family life, cooperative harmony with their neighbours, and the simple enjoyment of good food, shelter from the elements, and companionship with their fellow man. To turn away from those simple goals and demand of oneself and others the relationship of master and slave. What abyss of desolation must lurk within the hearts of such beings? I urge all to turn away from this evil. Do not give it even a moment's more tolerance. Cease being trapped in this mutually destructive cycle of violence and tell these cowardly bullies that you reject utterly their claims of authority, that you will not comply, but will seek to bring them to justice by informing your fellow men and women of the illegitimacy of their claims, until the people once again enjoy their rightful position as the masters of the law, when they take their seats upon the juries of the just. Thank you for watching.